Welcome back to the Innovation Engine podcast. I'm your host for this episode, 3Pillars Healthcare Industry Lead Steve Rowe. I'm excited to be joined today by 3Pillars Chief Innovation Officer, Pankaj Chawla, and our Director of Global Innovation, David Evans. This episode is a primer on GenAI for healthcare business leaders. We're going to address some of the questions you may have as you consider where and how to deploy GenAI in your org. How do you guard against hallucinations? Is GenAI too expensive to scale? And how do you protect patient and company data? Let's welcome our guests, Pankaj and David. Thanks for joining me today.
Excited to be here, Steve.
Glad to be here, Steve. Big questions you have. Looking forward to talking about them.
Well, before we start, let me just provide a little bit of context for our listeners. There's a lot of focus on GenAI within healthcare right now. That won't surprise anyone. A recent Gartner survey showed that 80% of health system CIOs are actively exploring AI use cases, slightly lower but similar numbers on the payer side. So every single healthcare business leader listening today, they probably already have some ideas around potential use cases for their org, for their function. And so what I want to do today is really go one step lower than that and focus on those questions around data accuracy, cost, privacy, and how to get started. First question, we've all heard about hallucinations. If you're thinking about deploying GenAI to solve a business problem, you want to be sure that the data you're putting in front of your call service reps or your clinicians or your members, that you can trust that it'll be accurate. So Pankaj, maybe you can start. Just explain to us, why do hallucinations happen in the first place?
That's a good question. Many of these large language models were trained using very large sets of data, primarily internet data, large combination of general purpose data that was created. And AI in general, and so does GenAI, they're all based on the predictive type methodology and algorithms under the hood, where they're predicting the next best, the industry calls it tokens, but next best phrase, next best word to complete that sentence, and next best sentence to complete that paragraph, and the next best paragraph to complete the document. That is something that's taken almost 8+ years to get accomplished through the technologies, but it is generating, it is predicting, it's trying to answer a question with a context, but it's generating that document. And as you can imagine, it's still a machine, and it can start drifting away. So if it drifts away and predicts the next phrase or next word wrong, then it starts to create that separation of the original intent of the question and answer and that's what they call hallucinations. So yeah, it's real. It's built into many of the systems, not by design, but the goal is to avoid hallucinations by coupling the LLMs with technologies that can be useful. And we of course have been working on that for a bit now, that I'm sure David can talk to and provide a lot more details.
All right,
Yeah,
Dave,
I think
you're up. How, especially in an enterprise context where you might have proprietary company data that you want to point to, how do you make sure it goes there rather than doing this general, I scoured the internet, I'm trained on the internet, I think the fee will be this much instead of what we know as a company it should be?
Yeah, I think you're not interacting directly with a large language model. The more that you're interacting directly with a large language model, as much as impressive as they're getting, you're more prone to hallucinations. So the most common architecture you're going to hear that's over top of any large language model is what's called retrieval augmented generation. And really what that means is that you're augmenting your responses or the data sources that are going to be used when generating a response. So as an example, when we recently worked on the payer chatbot, we needed to create data sources that had fee schedules for different payers. data sources that had ontologies around procedure codes or types of procedures. So we needed to make sure that we were providing data sources that had what you call a grounded truth. And that way, what you're doing then is you're leveraging those data sources as being the truth for your answers. And more so than what you're doing is you're leveraging the large language models to generate a clean natural language response. So augmenting it with data sources that have been curated and have been prepared for supporting Gen AI applications is a critical aspect of making sure your agents or your solutions are going to generate responses you can trust.
So I asked the chatbot, is this urgent care in network? Yep. The large language model is understanding what I'm saying, yeah. but it is not going and retrieving the answer. It is saying, I go to this, data set to get that answer. But then it is a different, and it's saying he wants to know if this is this particular urgent care network, but it's a different mechanism that's then going and fetching what that value is and returning it to the large language model. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, whether something is in network or not, that's gonna depend on the payer's network. So you really need that factual data to be the basis of the answer. You can't have it just generating or hallucinating, as they say, something that sounds right.
Yeah, so that's why we made efforts to not only provide the answer, but also provide this citation of where the answer comes from. Because just like in any other, when you quote facts, you have to quote citations that the facts come from. And that's what makes it real. And it's bringing those answers that David talked about, as well as the references that the answers come from.
And if I can take it a step further, our innovation lab has done a lot of research on what we call RAG assessment. So RAG assessment, there's different metrics you can use to measure the quality of responses, the amount of noise that might be in responses. So we've done this with internal data sets where we're building up knowledge bases within 3Pillar, and with client data now, and it does require that you need to make sure that you've got a human involved who's validating what is the grounded truth. If you use unclean data sources, it's still going to generate unclean responses. Using some curated data that you've got subject matter experts that are validating. Okay, here's your grounded truth. A RAG assessment framework is something we've hooked up, and then we can actually measure again the quality, the correctness of the responses, the amount of noise that might be generated. Sometimes large language models tend to be too verbose in their responses. So they'll kind of just add some extra adjectives. You don't really want those all the time. So you need to be able to control that, and ideally be able to measure the quality of the responses, so that you're not just going off of maybe a developer saying, "Well, that sounds right."
So what I'm hearing is a couple of things. If I'm a healthcare business leader, I'm interested in a use case. There's a component of training the language model. Which data source do I go to for which type of information, and restricting me to just going there, and anything that's around provider network status, I have to go to this data set. The large language model, have to go to that data set, and then the answer will be fed to me to then put back into context. That's point one. And point two, I'm hearing you say is there's an element of then training the model, the language model, in terms of how it presents that information. You don't want to be too verbose or provide too much information, as you were saying.
Yeah, and I think I'm a little pedantic on this term, but training is generally a term you use when you're actually applying training a core model. So That's not really what we're doing in this case. What we're doing is we're augmenting the large language model with trusted data sources, so that the trusted data sources are the primary source of truth, and you're leveraging the large language model that's been trained in order to be able to present a nice, clean, natural language response of that base of grounded truth of data.
Yeah, I think the best way to look at this, Steve, is just like you do in ChatGPT or whatnot, you keep adding more and more context. So get accurate data becomes part of your context to answer the question. So it's just like you make the system feed, the foundational model is doing its job, and then there's data that comes in that's all the right answers to the question, and then together they create that answer that makes human readable sense.
Okay, so that was data accuracy. What about cost? Another, I guess, hesitation a business leader might have is, sure, maybe a Gen AI application can get us better answers, quicker, more context, help my people do their jobs better. But at what cost? Isn't it expensive going out and using all this bandwidth power to answer each question? What, Pankaj, could you elaborate maybe on those concerns around cost?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a new breed of technology, much like the cloud services that took shape over the last 10, 15 years and became a mainstay for literally all the applications that you build in the big three cloud providers. This is a new breed of technologies that are being now serviced and provided by the technology providers. So there is a cost to using it. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and OpenAI are hosting their large language models. They have built initially. They talked about open sourcing it. Some of them did. Llama is an example where Facebook actually or Meta actually introduced open source models, but the cost of hosting it and running it is something that the cloud providers bears, and they pass it on to the users. Um, they have all closed. They become more closed source, I would say, and they have started to expose agents as APIs that you have to use to connect to that magic, that LLMs. And right now, most of them are charging per user per month, which is an expensive way to do it, especially when they also charge you for tokens and data. But it's early mover advantage. They have something. It's not commonly available right now, but it's changing very rapidly. And I'm sure David is going to talk about all the open source work that he's doing and creating services that are much better way of leveraging the technology. But keeping cloud provider costs, per user costs, just data costs, in addition to application development costs, are something that you should think about, because it's a new category of applications that are very beneficial to mankind.
So, David, how are you thinking through how you can build out Gen AI applications and keep those running costs in check?
Yeah, I think we recently actually put a white paper out on this, controlling the cost of your Gen AI applications. I think just to touch on a couple of the variables there, Pankaj mentioned how expensive it is per user per license cost. What audience do you if you're going to pay $30 per user per month, what's the audience you give that to? Is it going to be your whole company? And a lot of those solutions are going to maybe give you 70, 80% of what you want. And then you're going to look across and say, oh, well, I've got this group over here and they kind of need this capability. So let's get another product. They're all seem to be about 30, $40 per user per month. And that starts adding up pretty fast. And then you got to think, well, how much are they actually using it? So we actually had some of our product managers, our IT group was starting to provision ChatGPT licenses. $30, $25 per user per month. Now, of course, in the innovation lab, we've ended up standing up our own internal chat application, and that's providing access to hosted models within our infrastructure. And now we've started provisioning access, and what we found is, we get 100 users up there, and over the course of a month, so far based on usage, you're looking at less than 150, $200. And then so if we had gone out and gotten the per user license for each one of them, that definitely would have been much more expensive. Now, the other nice thing about being able to have this internally is you start to be able to experiment with different models, which are going to have different capabilities. We were able to, when Azure, recently supported the GPT-4o mini model, we were quickly able to modify our system to use that rather than the GPT-4 model. That decreased our cost by 25 times. Because these models are getting cheaper, and if you've got an infrastructure in place where you're nimble, you can start using different models for the right purposes, and also modifying or playing with which models you're using, in some cases, just to minimize cost, because you don't need the most, the biggest, best model for every little Gen AI use case. They're trained for different purposes, and it's ideal you're able to use them for those purposes.
So three things I heard there. One is building your AI application in a way that you actually have flexibility to swap out which large language model you're using.
Yep.
As their performance and cost might change.
Yep.
Part two, what I heard you say, and maybe you can elaborate on this for our listeners, is there are different LMUs that are powered differently, and so you might not need a certain model if it's doing something that's discrete and doesn't need to be that powerful. So when you are designing an AI application, or when our business leaders think through this and work with their CTO, are you orchestrating within a single application, or are you using multiple language models?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if a question comes through, we actually build workflows, and you might have a workflow that's using a large language model, and it's basically using it for a substep to say, what type of question is this? Based on the type of question, we can then route it to one path, which is going to be a model that's best used for answering that question. So we can get into developing fairly complex workflows, and leveraging a mix of maybe a large language model here, a graph database there, a knowledge base over here, and you want to be able to you want to be sure you're able to orchestrate the use of these different data sources and large language models to provide the most effective experience and response for the question being raised.
Yeah, I mean, I foresee a world very quickly coming where we will have thousands of models. Because right now we have few foundational models. They're very good, but they're large. One size does not have to fit all. But the world where we have thousands of models, these large language models will be probably used and are being used today to train these small models and make them better. And these models will be more vertically addressing the vertical space with their vertical niche areas. And what David just talked about in our architecture is the direction we're going down that path with the routers that are built into it to use the appropriate data set to answer the appropriate question using that small model. And that seems a far more effective, first of all, in answering the questions, but also effective cost-wise.
In healthcare, patient and member data, obviously a huge area of, people working in healthcare are very cognizant of how do they protect that data. And then of course there's other enterprise proprietary data, right? What is our exact medical policies or our negotiated rates? Well, some of that's public now, but there's a lot of data that you don't want to be exposed. How should the business leaders listening to this, how should they think about the risk of deploying Gen AI? Is the model going to be, now it understands our patients' data as well, and that could somehow come out in a different instance of this LMU? Walk us through what is the risk factor here.
Yeah, I'll go first on that. I think this is one of the core, in many people's mind, this is one of the core blockers from embracing this technology and moving forward. Both what happens to their data and what happens and how was the data model, how was the model trained in the first place, which is also causing some heartache and lawsuits that you see in the industry. But it should not prevent us from moving forward, because as David and I spoke about the architecture and design that we follow, it separates the two things. It separates the two concerns. One is using language and natural language. The other one is the data. We designed this from day one, understanding that you have to private the data, just like you would for any other cloud applications. There was a fear forever not using Salesforce.com by healthcare because, hey, Salesforce.com is a multi-tenant SaaS application, so therefore is my data secure? Clearly it is, and clearly they protect it and have it different instances. That's the logic and design behind creating private data for private instances for the clients who use it. And it's a walled garden with firewalls and everything else that's necessary to create that secured architecture, while leveraging these new services and technologies inside that walled garden, right? And delivering the solutions to the clients. So no way a client's data should be uploaded to, let's say, OpenAI even though they have an enterprise version now, there's always a fear if they would use that data for training further because it's just not open enough. So our solution to the problem is create, just like you would any other cloud application in the cloud, that cloud instance is dedicated to the client so that it's all their data and their protections are built into place by the big three.
Anything to add, David?
Yeah, I think you need to read the fine print. So the different large language models that you're signing up for. Again, they should be stating explicitly, we are not going to be using your data for training. We are not going to be consuming your data for later use, etc. You look at Azure's agreements with their hosted OpenAI models, nice and clear. You come over to ChatGPT, their default is pretty explicit. They may use your data. So that's a key reason why organizations are not wanting to do that. Now, these different services, they do have an opt-out model. So you need to make sure you click that option so you opt out of allowing them to use your data. But still, I think any healthcare, especially, you're going to get nervous or be outside of your HIPAA requirements if you don't recognize the fact that you're accessing this large language model through the World Wide Web. What's in between you and the large language model, and what's could potentially be capturing the data. So, you do need to read the fine print as you're signing up for different services, including different hosted large language models. In some cases, and this is another area where we've done some good research and have some accelerators, hosting large language models on your own GPU that you provision. You can do that using Olama. We're also have done some experimentation with NVIDIA's NIM stack, where we can host a large language model on our own GPU that we provisioned. The other nice thing about that, back to your cost question earlier, now, here I could have, say, 2-4 different instances of this model hosted across, a couple of GPUs. That gives me scalability. It also gives me a fixed price for my large language models. Now, not only am I not being charged per user licenses, I'm also not being charged per data licenses. I got a fixed cost on my GPU. So if you know that you're going to have a certain large language model instance that's going to get really heavy usage, you might want to look at hosting it on your own GPU. So this is another area where, yeah, we've built up these accelerators to make sure we know how to do this stuff, and can work it into an architecture for our clients, and stand up those different options for them where it's right for their use case.
So if you are business leader at a healthcare org or a CTO, CIO listening to this conversation, you're probably getting approached by very specific SaaS companies that have an AI component now. You're probably also getting, you have your own ideas for specific AI applications to, speed up how you're handling prior auth or reviewing claims or submit, whatever the use case is. Perhaps you two can give a bit of a teaser on how 3Pillar, what have we created to help these business leaders if they would like to have a follow-up conversation with you two about how to get started and how to work through some of these questions that you've raised today.
One comment I'll make on the SaaS application point you made. Yes, every SaaS application vendor is adding AI features to that platform, but it's the AI features that are related to that data in that platform, not cross multiple platforms, and not to mention all the unstructured data you have in your corporation that can make your employees far more efficient with what they do. So for example, if you take Salesforce.com's AI features that they are now advertising, it is related to the sales data sitting in that platform, but not outside the Salesforce that has lots of unstructured data in the company that you could also combine with that data to get intelligent answers for your employees to be very efficient in what they do. So I think there's going to be build versus buy thinking, but a lot of this is going to have to be buy, just like it used to be when it came to data warehouses and data lakes. Companies are building and integrating all this data sources into their own data warehouse to do dashboarding and decisioning and efficiency related use cases. It's the same world. It's going to be the same world, except it's now going to be AI based, GenAI based, and that's where the people are going to get more efficient. Well, I mean, I just saw something that was released this week, I believe, whereby JP Morgan and Chase, with their entire global company-wide footprint, they have released an internal tool, much like what David was talking about for us, that works with their data, structured and unstructured, and comes back with answers that make them more productive and better at customer support. So you'll see all that, and it's a very much of a data exercise, along with the features that go hand in hand with that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's where we see the world going to. And the other question that you asked, Steve, how does a healthcare C-level person get started? I'm sure they are thinking about different use cases that they have in their mind already. They probably have played with a few, and they're just trying to figure out, how do I assess to see what gives me the best bang for the buck, which is something that we do with our product management teams, where we actually work on the ROI achieved through the cost and the benefits that the use cases can realize.
Pankaj, David, today did not disappoint. If people want to follow up and have a conversation with you two, we'll put your emails in the show notes down below, and we'll also link to that white paper you mentioned, David, on thinking about cost. We'll link to that in the show notes. Guys, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Fully enjoyed it.